Hey guys, it's Raythe here. Today I want to talk about elves. Now, I'm known for vampire romances, but I also usually have a fantasy story involving elves in progress on wraithrain.com, whether it's a book series or a web serial on my website. If you only know about me from Dragon's Reign, I write both books and serial stories on my own site, which I started before Patreon even existed in 2010. Even though I publish a book every 3 to 6 months, most of my writing is for my serial site, which has 4 stories updating at the same time, and one of those serial stories is usually some kind of fantasy. Now, I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons, like many Dragon's Reign listeners, and of course, I have read Lord of the Rings and seen the movies many, many times. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with those elves for the longest time. Yes, they were beautiful and magical, but they also seemed like cold, remote snobs who never changed and didn't care about the non-elven world. And so freaking serious. I mean, has Galadriel or Elrond laughed in their lives? One wonders. As an ordinary human reading, even though I knew they were just stories, I still felt judged while reading about them. I also was reading a lot of Lovecraft and Stephen King at the same time, so it's no surprise that my first elven romance came out, well, a little different. And one of the first serial stories on Raythe Reign, The Dark Earth, Aiden is an ordinary human who has to move into his creepy grandfather's house because his family has fallen on hard times. But there's something wrong with the whole town, and he quickly finds out that his grandfather is mixed up in it. Aiden quickly discovers the existence of a separate, parallel world that holds magic, monsters, trolls, demons, and elves, one of which is an elven prince named Asher, who seems to know more about Aiden than Aiden does himself. And Asher is kind of like an elf from Lord of the Rings. He, along with most of the elven society in the Dark Earth story, distrusts magic and is prejudiced against mages. He's traditional and expects to take the throne. There's some of that Lord of the Rings snobbishness in Asher, but he's also emotional, romantic, and hasn't lost his desire to experience new things. He's also a bit of a trophy husband for Aiden, because who wouldn't want to bag a prince, an elven prince? These are tropes that I've always loved to both read and write about. The Dark Earth is literally a portal fantasy, and the thing about writing serially is that even though I sort of have a plan for how the stories will end, my focus is first and foremost on the journey. I like to keep chapters entertaining all the way through because people often read my serial stories one chapter at a time, so I write what I want to read. Unexpected revelations, beautiful settings, and lots of drama and romance. And since I don't write chapters in advance, I'm flexible about what could happen next. If one of my subscribers has a great idea about a side character, or they want to know more about the world, or they say they want to have 3 chapters where the characters go on holiday shopping in a magical market, then I could just do that right in the middle of this long, complicated story. So that's why The Dark Earth started out as having the premise of a young man who comes to a strange town and gets courted by an elven prince. But it ended up being this long saga of reincarnation, dragons, magic, an evil cult, and a lot more threads that I don't even remember because it was so long ago that I wrote it. As always, I write what I love. And that includes not just the kinds of stories, but that feeling of looking forward to something. I like cliffhangers. I like going to the movies early and waiting for them to start. The anticipation is part of the experience and makes it more satisfying for me. So I also love Christmas, not because I'm religious, but because the entire season has this anticipation about it. And there's always something new to do, decorations, food, parties. So for my subscribers, I try to capture that feeling of counting down to your birthday when you're a little kid, or opening up a new day on an advent calendar. So while The Dark Earth was updating, I also had an artist draw a remixed manga version of the same story and posted a page almost every day there wasn't a chapter. It just finished last month, so it's all there for subscribers to read. There are literally 11 volumes, I think really 13 when you count them all out. I do sell the downloadable versions through my own shop, but I haven't finished formatting the last volume yet, so that's coming. Volumes 1 through 10 are available, though, both from the shop and on Amazon. Oh, and here's a fun fact. We aren't allowed to sell Volume 6 on Amazon because there's sex in it. So the only place to get Volume 6 is through the shop. I honestly recommend getting it through us anyways because it's higher quality artwork. Amazon has a file size limit, so that compresses the artwork and makes it look not nearly as clear. And Volume 1 is free. So if you want to check it out, I'll post the link. The next time I visited elves was a serial story called The Elven's King's Blade, which is, a literal portal fantasy where an elven king has to come to the modern human realm to find his bonded protector, called his blade. The blade doesn't have to be a romantic mate. It's a bond of trust that can be a counselor, a friend, or more of a sibling bond. But of course, in my story, the king and his blade fall in love. And there is some of that elven snobbery in Athodin, the king who is disgusted by the idea of his blade being a human, because elves think that humans are savages. I think that the idea of elves being snobs might be forever ingrained in my mind because of Lord of the Rings, but it also makes it fun to have a developing relationship. Not exactly an enemies to lovers trope, but definitely a culture clash with some room for comedic moments as well as romantic ones. The Dark Earth was serious all the way through, and I wanted to have more lightness in the Elven King's Blade. I have an extended 10-chapter preview of the Elven King's Blade, which I'll post a link to in the notes. You can check that out as well. It's around 40,000 words, so you can get a real sense of what the story is like. But, of course, the fantasy story with the most humor right now, and maybe the most darkness, is the Cinders and Ashes series. It started out as a retelling of Cinderella with elves, but turned into its own thing because, Cinderella is not that long of a story, and I like to tell long stories. But in Cinders and Ashes, I have literal comic relief characters. Hello, Sergio. Hello, Leonid. I love you both. And the main couple also have many lighthearted moments and banter. Instead of elves, I actually have characters that are fae, which are similar to elves, but they're a little harder. I just came out with book 5 of 6, and book 6 is coming out in the summer. So if you get into the story, you won't have that long to wait for the end. After Cinders and Ashes is done, the next serial story on the site will have a Dungeons and Dragons-like atmosphere with not just elves, but other magical races like dwarves, maybe fairies, or something like drow or dragonborn. I will be asking my subscribers for ideas because they always have good thoughts. Anyway, that's my take on elves. What do you think about elves, especially as romantic leads? I really want to know. The best way to tell me your thoughts is to come to YouTube, find this episode, which will have the same title as the podcast, and leave a comment in the comment section. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Bye, guys.